This video here, community, is intended as a response to City Site 184. He kind of made a video more so geared towards younger kids who are maybe looking at getting into the hobby of role-playing, tabletop role-playing in particular, and are scared by the stigma that is presented, kind of the stigma that comes with playing Dungeons and Dragons. There are a couple points I want to make here. First of all, I think he makes some excellent points. I think he's got some good advice out there. I'll give you some examples of my experience as I've grown up. I'm 27 years old. I was born in 1984. And I've been into high fantasy and fantasy in general, and using my imagination and using my reading skills and creative skills since I could read. I could read basic words and things like that at the age of 3. I could read sentences, and I was writing by the age of 6. So I've always been relatively creative in that aspect. And let's see here. How do I put this? I am extremely tall, as I've noted in several videos. I'm 7 feet tall, and one of these days I'll make a video to prove it so that nobody's like, yeah, right, like he's 7 feet tall. And with that, the stigma that comes with that too is that you're going to be a jock. You're going to play hockey. You're going to do something physical in nature. And D&D, we'll use D&D as parlance for role-playing games because, I mean, D&D wasn't the first role-playing game I ever played. In fact, the first role-playing game I ever played was homebrewed by myself and a friend, using some basic ideas from basic other role-playing games. Just knowing that you need to have a set of rules in order to kind of make up for randomness, elements of randomness and stuff like that. However, I'm getting a little bit away from where I'm trying to go. I was raised as a jock. It was intended for me to be a basketball player since I was born, pretty much, since I was a little kid. My family always, well, my mom not so much, but my father and a lot of other members of the family never understood why I was the way that I was, or am the way that I am, because they say I've been gifted with this height and I should use it to the best of my advantage. But I never liked basketball. I thought it was kind of bogus. I thought it was a bullshit excuse for a sport. I've been a hockey fan my whole life, but our family could never afford to put me through hockey. And all the RPGing stuff that I picked up through friends and through being an inquisitive youngster. I mean, we didn't have the internet when I was a kid. When I first got into it, it was all word of mouth, going into arcades, going into gaming stores, card shops, things along those lines. Magic the Gathering played a slight role later in life, but I mean, I got into role-playing before that. And then I also became a musician at the age of about 16. I started picking up the bass guitar and then the guitar, and I started singing and really like involving myself heavily into music. But it never stopped me from role-playing, not once. People wouldn't really make fun of me. Some of the guys who knew me a little bit better and knew that I could take a joke and that I liked role-playing so much that it didn't matter to me if they made fun of me. They didn't really put a stigma on me because of my character, because of how I present myself and the way I went about my business. My best friends were all nerds as you'll call it. They're gamers. They like to play games. So especially tabletop games, any kind of card game, any tabletop games. Heroes of Might and Magic was one of the video games that we played, and there were several other video games that we tried and played, but we never found that the experience ever came close to that. It never once came close to that. That of a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game. And so we kept playing those games, and I can see, and I have been seeing my whole life. So over the last 20 years, at least, my whole life since being involved with role-playing, I have seen the stigma. I've seen people, the way they react to Dungeons and Dragons. However, I have never met one person, regardless of their creed, regardless of their race, regardless of their social status, who has played a role-playing game, and a good role-playing game, had a good experience with good GM and good players, who hasn't liked it. I've known several jocks who I've corrupted, if you will. Lots of this going on in this video, but I corrupted these guys by getting them into role-playing games slightly, and they loved them. They had a blast because you're stepping outside of your skin. I mean, most of those guys, you knew who they were going to play. They were in it for the hack and slash, and they wouldn't really role play. They were always nervous about the role playing aspect, but they'd play and they'd have a good time. They'd want to come back. So there is a stigma that is painted socially on role players. I don't think there is a stereotype for nerd in general, but that's just nerd in general, and role-playing games get lumped in with nerds. But it appeals to so many types of people. Actors, who usually, if you think about it, actors get a lot of slag and a lot of stigma placed on them when they're young. Drama kids, think about it. Drama kids have so much more stigma than the jocks, the basketball players, the hockey players, the football players. And even more so than the popular kids, you know, the ones who are experimenting sexually and with drugs at really young ages. These people tend to think that that's what the world's about because of the way the world is presented to them, you know, what beauty is and all that stuff. But that's getting metaphysical, and I'm not here to pass social judgments or to try to change society in any way. I'm just trying to present, not necessarily even an argument, just present my point of view on this subject. And I definitely agree with City Site 184 about the stigma, that it does exist. I agree. However, moving on, with the advent of games like Warcraft, which is a direct ripoff of Warhammer, a lot of people don't realize that, but Warcraft and StarCraft are direct ripoffs of Games Workshop's intellectual property, of Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000. With the advent of that game, and especially the advent of the online version, the stigma's gone away. I know a lot of people who otherwise would never get down and play a role-playing game who have experienced the role-playing experience through the video games. Now, in my opinion, that is slightly tainted. That's a tainted way of going about playing role-playing, because it doesn't really, there is no role-playing. I mean, you can with the microphones and all that, you can role-play your character to other people, but most people, in my experience, didn't do that. It was running and gunning, power gaming. There was no, my character is completely useless in combat. However, my character is very intellectual and smart, so the GM can't hide information on him because my character has the ability to read through this, or he has knowledge skills, which is another video I'll make for another time in response to Tanner, T.E. Walker 13. I want to respond about why I think that social skills and knowledge skills are important and very amazing if played and utilized correctly. However, that's aside. What I really want to say is that I think it's bullshit. I was a musician I still am a musician, but I was a playing musician who played a lot. We had groupies and we jammed all the time and we played lots of shows. Our band was called the Deadbeats. You can look up the Deadbeats Lethbridge on YouTube, and you can see our band play. We're a little bit drunk at the time, so the songs don't necessarily come across as good, but we were a solid band. We had a cult following in our town. A lot of people in our province, which is essentially like a state for all you Americans, a lot of people knew about who we were. We were infamous. And with that came the stigma of, you know, you're a cool person. You play in a rock and roll band. But our rock and roll band was all about comic books and Star Wars. We were all geeks. We loved video games, and we all loved role-playing games. I was the most experienced with the role-playing games. I mean, we never actually got a group together. I would love to run a group with those 4 other guys in the band and do a Deadbeats zombie apocalypse kind of role-playing game with them. I think that would be fun. However, what I'm trying to say here is that even with that stigma, or not even, that's a bad word, even with that label, you're a rocker, you're getting laid, you're smoking drugs, and you're drinking a lot, and you're partying all the time, right? That's what was painted on us. And sure, we played that up and we did that, but we were all hardcore nerds. We all are still hardcore nerds. And I just don't think that the people give it enough credit. So I agree with you. I think people need to step back and take a look at the massive amount of amazing opportunities and qualities and experience that is offered by role-playing games. I've corrupted many people into role-playing games by, you know, showing them to them and trying to run a good game. A lot of people, I've only had a few people who didn't enjoy the experience, but that tended to be the group, or I just wasn't on my game at the time as the GM or narrator, as I like to call it. But I guess I'm getting, this is a total ramble. I am a rambling man. That comes with the territory, I guess. But I agree. The things that it produces or presents to people who want to play it, RPGs, especially tabletop RPGs, are, like you said, chances to act out a character, to be somebody that you otherwise could not be or would not want to be in real life. You could be the sneak thief, even if you're the most honest person in the world. You can give that a try, and you can get all of those desires out through the game. It's creative, like you said. It raises your intellectual capabilities highly. Imaginative people tend to be better at this, but it can be learned. People who play this stuff tend to get more imaginative. It's a chance to display your artistic skills. There's so much that is left unsaid with role-playing games that most people don't understand. And like you said, they equate it to nerds, the glasses, nose in the book, playing the Magic the Gathering nerds, right? But that's not the case. Even with Magic the Gathering, I know a lot of non-standard stereotypical nerds who play the game and love it. So I personally think that it's changing. The world is changing. People are being a little bit more open-minded to it. And as more games are being released to compete with the big ones, like especially Dungeons and Dragons, especially since it has dropped off, in my opinion, and totally gone away from role-playing, but gone directly into combat and tactical combat and roll the dice to do the damage kind of stuff. The rest of it's pretty much left up solely to the GM to develop any kind of role-playing. It's a system of rules for combat and skill resolution, but even then, that's a pretty weak system. In the 4th edition of D&D, they left a lot to be desired there. But that, in and of itself, is going to bring a bunch of people into it because it's not necessarily a simple system. It's a lot more simplified than, say, 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons, but it's more simple, and it provides, I find, a lot of people in my group, I had a bad game rant about how people don't want to play, and I find that I talked to them since then, and it feels to me like they just want to do combat. And it makes sense. I presented Warhammer as a dangerous place, but I like social interaction in games as well. There's always downtime between combat. It's not one constant melee unless you're in a battle. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth, I guess, on this subject. Probably ramble on again for some time, but I really wanted to address this issue and say that we don't worry about it. Who cares what somebody else thinks of you? Because that's such a high school problem and concern. It seems so important to you when you're in your little high school bubble, but take some psilocybin. Not on my word, just do it. And your mind changes soon, or just live a bit and your mind changes soon. You'll find you'll start liking Neil Young's music a lot more as you get older. The themes start to make more sense to you, and you can break down and understand RPG games as you grow up and grow older. But I just think my main point is, don't worry about what stigmas are painted about the hobby. It's a beautiful hobby. The most creative and intelligent people I know play the hobby. So this is what I say to people who think that we're useless, good-for-nothing people. All I say is fuck them. Keep gaming, guys.